Imagine standing at the very pinnacle of power. An entire city holds its breath, hanging on your every word. All eyes are fixed on you as if you alone hold their fate. But in that very moment, a silent darkness begins to rise. It doesn't roar, it doesn't announce itself, but it's coming step by step to drag you into an abyss no one can save you from. This was the tragic fate of Annas and Caiphas, the high priests who once made Jerusalem tremble. They condemned Jesus to the cross, believing that one trial was enough to silence the voice of God forever. But they were wrong. From Golgotha did not come silence, but a storm. A divine force began to descend, haunting their souls, leading to deaths so terrifying that ancient historians dared not record the full truth. What happened to these men who thought they were untouchable? Why did their downfall shake the world so deeply? The story you're about to hear isn't just a page of blood-stained history. It's a spiritual journey where human power dissolves before the eternal will of God. From illegal trials and supernatural signs that shook the heavens to the unstoppable rise of the Christian movement, you'll witness the collapse not only of Annas and Caiphas, but also Pontius Pilate, men who dared to challenge the Holy One. Have you ever wondered what happens when man tries to defy the will of God? Stay with us until the final second of this video, because what you're about to hear may shake you, move you, and change the way you see faith, justice, and mercy. If you're ready for this gripping journey, hit the like button to support the channel, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next powerful Bible story. Now, prepare your mind and your heart. Picture a man who stands silently in the shadows, not needing titles nor basking in glory. Yet with a single nod, he could make all of Jerusalem tremble. That man was Annas, not just a high priest, but a master manipulator, the puppeteer behind the sacred city's most powerful decisions. Around the year 6 AD, the Romans appointed him as high priest, a role that wasn't merely religious, but a position at the center of Jewish politics and economic life. That title gave him control over the temple, where thousands of pilgrims gathered each year, and with them came an unstoppable flow of silver and gold. But do you think Annas's power ended with his title? Not even close. When the Romans stripped him of his position in 15 AD, many believed his reign was over. But in truth, it was only the beginning of something far more sinister. Annas didn't need a throne to rule. He wielded something far stronger, an invisible network of influence woven from decades of cunning and control. Imagine him as a giant spider spinning a web across Jerusalem, each strand a relationship, a whispered word in the dark, a carefully laid scheme. Ancient historian Flavius Josephus, in Antiquities of the Jews, described Annas as a figure so powerful that even the Romans treated him with caution. He wasn't just a religious leader, he was a political tactician, a strategist who turned setbacks into stepping stones. When his title was taken, he didn't fade away. He retreated into the shadows, where he became even more dangerous. What gives a man the ability to hold power long after losing his official title? The answer is influence, mastery, and turning others into instruments of his will. Annas built an untouchable family dynasty. One by one, he placed his sons, Eleazar, Jonathan, Theophilus, Matthias, and Ananus, into the office of high priest. But his boldest move, appointing his own son-in-law, Joseph ben Caiaphas, known to history simply as Caiaphas, to the same exalted role. That single act didn't just extend Annas's influence, it forged a family alliance so strong that the city bowed in silence. And so we're left to wonder, could a man with such boundless ambition ever stop to ask whether he was defying the will of God? Or worse, did he believe he was the one chosen by God to rule? If Annas was the mind behind the curtain, then Caiaphas was the face in the spotlight, the man chosen to stand before the people and carry out the plans crafted by his powerful father-in-law. Joseph ben Caiphas, known simply as Caiaphas, was appointed high priest around 18 AD. Remarkably, he held that position for nearly 18 years, longer than anyone before him during a time when Jerusalem's leadership changed hands, frequently under Roman control. But pause for a moment and ask yourself, was Caiaphas truly in charge? Or was he merely a puppet, a carefully positioned tool in the hands of Annas, who continued to pull the strings from the shadows? Caiaphas was no fool. He was intelligent, ambitious, and politically shrewd. He knew how to please the Romans, those iron-fisted rulers of Jerusalem, while still maintaining favor with the Jewish leadership in the Sanhedrin, the supreme religious council. According to the historian Josephus, the Romans trusted Caiaphas for one reason: his ability to keep the peace in a city constantly simmering with rebellion and unrest. Yet, despite standing at the pinnacle of authority, Caiaphas could never fully escape the shadow of Annas. Imagine the scene. Caiaphas, draped in ornate priestly garments, delivering verdicts before the crowds, but in his mind, the voice of Annas still echoed, guiding every decision, every word. What drove Caiaphas to accept such a role? Was it loyalty to the house of Annas, or a personal hunger to hold on to power at all costs? Perhaps it was both. He knew that his position depended on a delicate balance, pleasing the Romans, upholding religious order, and protecting the vast financial engine of the temple, an empire built and overseen by Annas. But he also knew that a single misstep could bring everything crashing down. Think about it. How does a man stand at the top of the world and still live in fear of being toppled? Caiaphas wasn't just fighting for his own authority. He was fighting to preserve an empire forged in secret. But then, a carpenter from Galilee walked into the temple, and from that moment, everything Caiaphas and Annas had built began to tremble. Have you ever wondered what happens when a man who believes himself untouchable comes face to face with a power greater than all the kingdoms of this world? The temple in Jerusalem, sacred symbol of Jewish faith, was the beating heart of the holy city. But for Annas and his family, it was more than a place of worship. It was a massive economic machine, engineered with chilling precision to serve their own interests. Every year, tens of thousands of pilgrims traveled to Jerusalem, bringing with them devotion, reverence, and the desperate hope of drawing near to God. But as they stepped into the temple courts, they didn't just encounter the divine. They entered a carefully crafted system designed to strip them of every last coin. Picture this. A pilgrim, perhaps a poor farmer from Galilee, arrives with what little savings he has, ready to offer his sacrifice. But before he can approach the altar, he's stopped at the money changers' tables. Why? Because common coins, like denarii or drachmas, aren't accepted here. Only temple currency, controlled entirely by the house of Annas, is valid. And the exchange rate? Outrageous. Most of the profit flowed directly into Annas's private coffers. Want to buy a dove or a lamb for sacrifice? You can, but the price might be 5, even 10 times what it costs outside the temple walls. According to records in the Talmud and the writings of Josephus, this system of currency exchange and sacrificial sales generated staggering wealth, making the family of Annas one of the richest in all Jerusalem. While pilgrims struggled to afford the smallest offerings, the high priest's family built palaces, bought land, and fortified their dominion. Think about that injustice. Every prayer, every plea for forgiveness, every sacred hope turned into silver and gold in the hands of Annas. And the Romans, they didn't mind. As long as peace was maintained, taxes collected, and rebellion silenced, they allowed Annas and Caiaphas to run their religious enterprise unchecked. But do you feel the fire of anger rising in your heart? How could men who claim to be spiritual leaders, tasked with guiding people to God, be the very ones exploiting their faith? If you've ever witnessed someone use religion for personal gain, Comment, justice will come to declare that no injustice escapes the eyes of the Almighty. This system seemed unbreakable. Annas and Caiphas had built an empire that controlled not just money, but belief, hope, and the destiny of a people. But what happens when one man dares to rise? A man who fears nothing, who's bound by neither wealth nor power, and who looks straight into their system and declares, "You have turned my father's house into a den of thieves." That was the moment everything began to fall apart. On a fateful day, as sunlight streamed through the towering pillars of the temple in Jerusalem, a carpenter from Galilee stepped into its courts, and the world of Annas and Caiphas began to unravel. Jesus did not come to pray or offer sacrifices like other pilgrims. He came to act. With eyes blazing like fire, he overturned the money changers' tables, sending coins flying like autumn leaves in the wind. He released the caged doves and lambs meant for sacrifice. And then, with a voice that thundered like a storm, he declared, "My house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves." Picture that moment. The temple courtyard, usually filled with the noise of commerce, animals, and bargaining, suddenly fell silent. The crowd stood in stunned awe. The priests froze, and somewhere in the shadows, Annas must have felt rage boiling in his chest, like an unseen hand tightening around his heart. According to the Gospel of John, 2:13-16 and others, this was not just an outburst, it was a declaration of war. Jesus wasn't just flipping tables, he was toppling the very foundation of Annas and Caiphas' power, their financial grip on the faith of the people. But what terrified them even more was that the people listened. They believed him, they followed him, and they began to worship him. That was a threat Annas and Caiphas could not tolerate. How could a nameless carpenter with no wealth, no political backing, dare to challenge a system so carefully built over decades? How could one man, armed only with truth and faith, confront an empire built on greed and manipulation? But what they didn't realize was this. They were not facing just a man. They were standing against the very Son of God, and his words, his actions, would not only shake Jerusalem, they would alter the course of human history. Think of the moments in your life when a single act of truth pierced through layers of injustice. Maybe you've seen someone stand up for what's right, even when it cost them everything. If you've ever felt the power of truth rising against corruption, comment, "God is truth," to declare your faith. Jesus' act in the temple was not just the beginning of Annas and Caiphas' downfall. It was the spark that ignited a movement, one that would change the world forever. Imagine a dimly lit chamber, illuminated only by flickering oil lamps. The most powerful men in Jerusalem gather in the shadows, not to pray, but to conspire in secrecy. This was the setting of the trial of Jesus, a secret, illegal proceeding that broke every sacred rule of Jewish law. It was orchestrated by Annas and Caiphas, desperate to extinguish the threat posed by the carpenter from Galilee. According to Jewish law, as recorded in the Mishnah, Sanhedrin 4:1, trials involving capital punishment were to take place during daylight hours in the official council chamber with credible witnesses and a defense for the accused. But that night, Annas and Caiphas had no interest in justice. They wanted one thing: blood. Picture the scene. Jesus, hands bound, is dragged through the silent streets of Jerusalem under the cloak of darkness. He is not brought to court, but to the high priest's residence, not to be judged fairly, but to face a council that had already decided his fate. Caiphas, eyes cold and calculating, orders the witnesses forward. But what follows is chaos. The false witnesses, bribed to accuse, contradict one another. One cries out, "He said he would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days." Another protests, "No, he spoke of a temple not made with human hands." By law, at least 2 witnesses must agree in order to pronounce a death sentence. But their lies crumble before Caiphas' eyes, and the so-called trial begins to unravel. Through it all, Jesus stands silent, not in fear, but in a strength that shakes the room. According to Mark 14:61, his silence enrages Caiphas as if he were confronting a force beyond human comprehension. In a desperate move, Caiphas breaks another sacred rule. He directly questions the accused, a forbidden act under Jewish legal procedure. Voice trembling with fury, he shouts, "I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us, are you the Messiah, the Son of God?" The room goes still. Time itself seems to stop. Then Jesus speaks, calm but with a thunder that echoes through eternity. "I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power, coming on the clouds of heaven," a direct reference to Daniel 7:13. And for Caiphas, it was a strike to the heart of his pride. Can you imagine the shock on his face? This was not just an admission, it was a declaration of war, not just against Caiphas, but against the entire empire Annas and his house had built on lies. After the illegal trial, Annas and Caiphas believed they had won. Jesus was sentenced to death, dragged to Golgotha, where iron nails pierced his hands and the cross was raised high. From a distance, Annas and Caiphas may have watched, wearing the smug smiles of men convinced that their problem was dying before their eyes. But were they truly in control, or had they unknowingly become part of a far greater plan, one that no earthly power could stop? As Jesus hung on the cross, something strange began to unfold. At precisely noon, when the sun should have been at its brightest, a thick darkness fell over the land, an oppressive veil not caused by clouds or dust, but by something far beyond the natural. According to the Gospel of Luke 23:44-45, this darkness lasted for 3 full hours, casting a chilling silence over the streets of Jerusalem. People paused mid-step, faces turned skyward, fear settling into their bones. In the temple, uneasy glances were exchanged between priests. Caiphas likely tried to dismiss it. "Just a dust storm," he might have said. But his voice must have trembled because deep down, he knew this was no ordinary event. Then came the final moment. Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." Luke 23:46. And instantly, the ground beneath Jerusalem began to shake. Not a faint tremor, but a violent quake that split stones, rattled walls, and sent people running in terror through the city streets. Yet the most terrifying sign was still to come. Inside the temple, the great curtain that separated the Holy of Holies, the sacred space where only the high priest could enter once a year, suddenly tore in two from top to bottom. This veil, over 60 feet tall and thick as a man's hand, was not something human hands could tear. As recorded in the Talmud and the Gospel of Matthew 27:51, the temple plunged into chaos. A terrified temple attendant rushed to Caiphas and gasped, "Master, the veil, it's torn in half." In that instant, Caiphas's entire world began to collapse, because the curtain wasn't just fabric. It was a symbol of exclusive power, of sacred authority his family had controlled for generations. And when it tore, so did the illusion of control. The unraveling had begun. Now ask yourself this: what happens when nature itself rises in protest against human injustice? A midday darkness, a trembling earth, a veil torn by unseen hands. These were not coincidences. They were declarations. Annas and Caiphas were not merely condemning a man. They were standing in defiance of the will of God. If you've ever felt the power of the divine move in ways no human could explain, comment, "God is power," to declare your faith that no injustice escapes his justice. But the story wasn't over. As night fell over Jerusalem, unsettling whispers began to spread through the streets. People spoke of tombs opening and the righteous dead, long buried, suddenly rising and walking among the living. According to the Gospel of Matthew 27:52-53, the tombs broke open and many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs and appeared to many. The city was gripped by awe and fear. Men and women claimed to see familiar faces, those who had died years ago, now walking, speaking, and testifying to life beyond the grave. Word of this chaos undoubtedly reached Annas and Caiphas, and one can only imagine the dread that seized their hearts. These were men who believed they held power over life and death, who thought they had silenced the threat of Jesus once and for all, now faced with a reality they couldn't explain. How could the dead rise? How could everything they thought was buried come surging back with unstoppable force? In a panic, they went to Pilate, the Roman governor, and begged, "Sir, we remember that deceiver said, 'After 3 days I will rise again. Please order the tomb to be secured until the 3rd day.'" Matthew 27:63-64. Pilate, perhaps weary or indifferent, agreed. Guards were stationed. A massive stone sealed the entrance. A Roman seal marked it as untouchable. To them, the plan was foolproof. But could stone and soldiers truly stop the will of God? When faced with the unexplainable, humans often try to deny it, suppress it, control it. Annas and Caiphas chose to bury the truth. But truth does not stay buried. If you've ever witnessed something so miraculous it left you speechless, comment, "God does the impossible" to declare your faith that He is still moving in ways no power on earth can resist. These signs and wonders didn't just shake Jerusalem, they marked the beginning of the downfall of Annas and Caiphas. On the morning of the 3rd day, as the first light of dawn broke across the horizon, the guards stationed at Jesus' tomb came running to Caiphas' residence, pale and trembling. Their voices cracked with fear as they described a brilliant light, as if the sun itself had descended to the earth, and powerful beings that overwhelmed them to the point of collapse. "The stone, it was rolled away," they stammered. "The tomb, it's empty." According to the Gospel of Matthew 28:2-4, an angel of the Lord had appeared, rolled the stone aside, and the guards were so terrified they became like dead men. This was not just an event. It was the turning point of history. The resurrection of Jesus shattered every scheme Annas and Caiphas had tried to construct. But Caiphas refused to surrender. In a desperate move, he pulled out a heavy bag of silver, handed it to the guards, and commanded them, "Tell people that his disciples came during the night and stole the body while you were asleep." Matthew 28:13. That lie spread quickly through Jerusalem, backed by officials and repeated as if it were fact. But do you really believe a bag of silver can bury the greatest truth in all of history? Deep down, Annas and Caiphas knew the truth had already slipped from their grasp. The resurrection of Jesus wasn't just his victory. It was the unraveling of everything they had built through fear, control, and deception. And now, piece by piece, their empire was falling apart. When you're confronted with truth, what do you choose? To deny it, to silence it, to buy your way out, or to embrace it and let it change you? Annas and Caiphas chose to bury it. But truth from God cannot be buried. If you've ever witnessed truth rise against every obstacle, comment, "God's truth prevails," to share your belief that no lie can ever overcome His light. The empty tomb was not just the beginning of Christianity, it was the final blow to the power of Annas and Caiphas, ending an era they thought they controlled, and beginning one they could never contain. Just weeks after Annas and Caiphas believed they had extinguished the threat of Jesus, a new fire ignited, spreading through Jerusalem with unstoppable force. On the day of Pentecost, as recorded in Acts 2, the apostles, those who once trembled in hiding, stood boldly in public, filled with extraordinary courage. Peter, The same man who had denied Jesus 3 times during his trial now stood in the temple courts before thousands and declared with a voice that rang like a trumpet, "Fellow Israelites, listen to this. Jesus of Nazareth, whom you crucified, God has raised from the dead." Acts 2:22-24. The shock on the faces of the priests must have been overwhelming. How could these frightened men become a wildfire of truth, boldly challenging the very system Annas and Caiphas had built? But the power of this movement didn't end with words. The apostles performed miracles that left crowds in awe. In Acts 3:1-10, Peter and John healed a man who had been crippled from birth, right at the entrance to the temple. This man, who had begged for years, suddenly leapt to his feet, walking and dancing, praising God in front of the stunned crowd. Peter seized the moment and proclaimed, "By the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whom you crucified, this man stands healed." Acts 3:16. Every word pierced Annas and Caiphas like a dagger. They had tried to bury the name of Jesus. Now it was spreading louder and faster than ever before. Have you ever seen something thought to be dead come back stronger than anyone imagined? What terrified Annas and Caiphas even more was how fast the Christian movement grew. According to Acts 6:7, the number of disciples in Jerusalem increased rapidly, and a large number of priests became obedient to the faith. Imagine the humiliation. Those who once served under Annas, priests who had upheld the temple system, were now turning to follow Jesus, the very one they had condemned. Day after day, thousands gathered to hear the apostles preach and joined the movement. Jerusalem, the city Annas and Caiphas once ruled, was now ablaze with a faith they could no longer suppress. If you've ever seen a tiny spark grow into a wildfire that no one could stop, comment "Faith prevails" to declare your belief that nothing can extinguish the will of God. As the Christian movement spread throughout Jerusalem, the empire of Annas and Caiphas began to crack. They had made a promise to the Romans, peace and control. But now, Jerusalem was more unstable than ever. Thousands gathered daily, declaring allegiance to a risen king. The Romans, known for their zero tolerance toward rebellion, took notice. According to the historian Josephus in Antiquities of the Jews, reports of unrest in Jerusalem reached the highest Roman authorities. In 36 AD, Lucius Vitellius, governor of Syria, arrived in the city and witnessed firsthand Caiaphas's failure to maintain order. In a swift and merciless act, Vitellius removed Caiaphas from office, stripping away the ornate priestly robes he had once worn with pride. The man who had judged others now found himself judged, his glory publicly dismantled before the very people he once ruled. But Caiaphas's downfall didn't end there. He was summoned to Rome, the heart of the empire, to answer for his failures. The once mighty voice that commanded soldiers now whispered in chains, walking in shame before emperors who showed no mercy. According to early Christian traditions, recorded by writers like Eusebius, Caiaphas fell into a deep and consuming despair. His mind was tormented by memories of the illegal trial, the calm gaze of Jesus, and the supernatural signs he could never explain. Had he realized he had condemned the very Son of God? Was that guilt too heavy to bear? Stories passed down by the early church claim Caiaphas never found peace. Haunted and hollow, he wandered in the shadows of his own soul, until, in utter hopelessness, he ended his own life. Have you ever considered the crushing weight of guilt when it becomes too real to escape? As for Annas, his end was even more horrific. According to early Christian records, he was bound with wet oxhide and sent to Rome for questioning. As the sun dried the leather, it shrank hour by hour, tightening around his body with unbearable pain. The man who once ruled Jerusalem with absolute authority died slowly, strangled by judgment, far from home, alone. His death was not just an event, It became a warning passed down through generations that no one can oppose the will of God without facing the consequences. They were once untouchable. Now their names are remembered only as a solemn reminder of divine justice. If you've ever witnessed justice arrive in ways no one expected, comment "God's justice cannot be escaped" to declare your belief that nothing remains hidden from his sight. But the story doesn't end with Annas and Caiphas. Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor who once stood before a raging crowd, washed his hands in a cold ritual and claimed innocence in the death of Jesus, could not escape the justice of God. Picture that moment. A man of power, believing a few drops of water could absolve him, standing above the crowd with hollow eyes, convinced that ceremony alone would shield him from responsibility. But can such a gesture ever erase the verdict passed on the very Son of God? According to historical accounts like Eusebius's ecclesiastical history, Pilate's political career began to unravel shortly after the crucifixion. Reports of unrest in Jerusalem, along with other missteps, eroded the Romans' confidence in him. He was summoned back to Rome, dismissed from his position, and exiled to a distant province, stripped of title, status, and any remaining honor. But Pilate's downfall went far deeper than public disgrace. Early Christian traditions, including the Acts of Pilate, describe how he was haunted by relentless nightmares, visions of the trial, the silence of Jesus, and the weight of the judgment he had passed. His wife, Claudia, had once received a divine warning in a dream. "Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream." Matthew 27:19. Pilate ignored the warning, and now the price was due. Some ancient stories tell of his death being followed by rejection. His body refused burial in multiple places, as if even the earth itself would not receive him. Imagine the horror. The man who once held the fate of others in his hands, now cast out, even in death, by both man and heaven. Can anyone truly wash away guilt without facing the judgment of God? If you've ever seen someone try to run from the consequences of their actions, only to be caught by truth itself, comment, "God's justice is eternal," to declare your belief that no lie, no denial, and no power can hide from the gaze of the Almighty. The fall of Annas, Caiphas, and Pontius Pilate was not merely a string of personal failures, it was a divine revelation. A reminder that no power on earth can stand against the will of God. In 70 AD, just as Jesus had prophesied in Matthew 24:2, Roman legions surrounded Jerusalem in a brutal siege. After months of starvation and bloodshed, the temple, once the heart of Annas and Caiaphas' empire, was reduced to ashes. Flames consumed everything. Gold melted between the stones, and Roman soldiers tore the temple apart, stone by stone, to seize it, fulfilling Christ's words, "Not one stone will be left upon another." The sacrificial system, the very foundation of Annas' power and wealth, vanished forever. But here is the most astonishing part. The very actions of Annas, Caiaphas, and Pilate, meant to destroy Jesus, became the means by which God fulfilled his plan of salvation. The cross, once a symbol of shame, became the greatest victory in history. Through what seemed like defeat came forgiveness. Through what looked like silence came redemption. Pause and reflect. How can the greatest injustice become the greatest act of divine love? If you've ever seen God turn failure into victory, comment "God's justice and mercy" to share your faith. The story of Annas, Caiaphas, and Pilate is not just a warning, it is a promise. No one, no matter how powerful, can resist the will of God without consequence. But in his justice, there is always mercy. Jesus, through his death and resurrection, opened a path of salvation, not just for the faithful, but even for those who once denied him. Have you ever felt God's mercy reach you in a moment when all hope seemed lost? Share your story in the comments, and together, let us glorify the unstoppable, unshakable plan of God, the one who turns ashes into glory and death into eternal life. The story of Annas, Caiphas, and Pontius Pilate is a living testimony that no earthly power, no matter how great, can stand against the will of God without consequence. They believed the cross, a sealed tomb, and silver coins could silence Jesus forever. But instead of triumph, they became pawns in the greatest redemption story ever written. From the 3 hours of darkness over Jerusalem, the earth-shaking quake, the torn temple veil, to the unstoppable rise of the Christian movement and their own haunting deaths, every moment proved one eternal truth: God's justice is inescapable. Yet within his judgment, Jesus offered boundless mercy. His death on the cross, once seen as defeat, became the greatest victory, opening the way to forgiveness and salvation for all. So pause and ask yourself, have you ever felt the weight of God's justice in your life? A moment when everything seemed lost, yet somehow grace found you? Have you ever experienced his mercy when you needed it most? This is more than just a history lesson. It's a call to reflection. The choices we make today shape the legacy we leave tomorrow. Will you stand on the side of truth, faith, and light, or let ambition and fear lead you down a path of regret? Share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes one line like God's justice and mercy is all it takes to bring hope to someone searching. If you've seen God turn the impossible into reality, share your story below, and let's glorify his power together. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to our channel to explore more powerful Bible stories. Live in God's light, for while his justice is certain, his mercy is always open to those who seek him. The fall of Annas, Caiphas, and Pilate is not just a tale of downfall. It is proof that God's plan always prevails, and his love overcomes every injustice. Thank you for walking this journey with us. Keep pressing forward in your faith, and we'll see you in the next video.